Today on Locked On Red Wings, how hot is Derek Lalonde's seat?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a podcast producer for the Daily J, a WWJ News Radio podcast. Well, Scotty's a host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. My eyes got.
No, that was a good, dramatic pause there. Really,
I lost where I was for a
their
second.
terms of use. I almost said it for you there. I was like, oh, I like the pause there, though.
I lost where I was for a second there. Happy Tuesday to those listening to us. It's going to be an interesting one today, Scotty, because we're going to do something we really didn't want to have to do because, we don't like being mean, Scotty. We don't like being mean. But I think it's very fair at this point to ask the question, how hot is Derek Lalonde's seat, or is it hot at all? Because in just year two of his tenure on the Detroit Red Wings coaching staff as the head coach, the team is in an absolute free fall for the second time this season. This time on the tail end of 2 months of straight success. So you have to have that as context when having this conversation. But right now, in the most important part of this season, they're in an absolute free fall with no end in sight. And you have to wonder how much of this is on the team and how much of this is on the coach, and whether or not there's conversations about the heat underneath Derek Lalonde's butt on that seat.
Yeah, that was a good transition. I don't know. I go back and forth a lot, man. Like I said it earlier. This was probably last week. Now this is only episode 2 of the week. I stand by what I said about this is not all one person's doing, right? This is not, this entire free fall is on the coaching staff, or vice versa, right? That none of it's on the coaching, it's all on the players. Like this is very much a group effort, and I want to make that very clear. But I do think that everyone is playing a hand, and I am incredibly, much like a lot of other people, frustrated with how a lot has been handled on the coaching side of things during this free-for-all. We'll talk about a few of the different, biggest things that stand out to us throughout this episode. But in terms of, to answer your question finally, just initial, I don't think it's very hot right now. I do think that we're, it's certainly objectively hotter than it was 2 weeks ago, right? I think that obviously, but in terms of are the Red Wings actually in the front office considering hey, should we can Lalonde right now mid-season, or even should we wait and do it in the summer? I don't think so. They're still, as crazy as it is, in a playoff spot right now, whether that's trending upwards or downwards. I don't think that they're going to completely erase the the 2 months prior because of really bad 3 weeks, but that's neither really here nor there. I'm very frustrated with how things are going, etc. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but this is a situation where firing someone is mid-season while you're in wild card 2 would be a heck of a statement, very much so. So I think maybe the they should fire him thing is maybe overblown. But that being said, if they're this bad the rest of the season, then yeah, man, then obviously this summer we're going to have that conversation 100%. I'm not trying to say that it's not in the back of somebody's mind right now, but I just is he going to get fired tomorrow? No, I think there's next to a 0% chance he's fired tomorrow.
Yeah, I think as it stands right now, the burner has been turned on. I think it's the burner's on low, but I think the burner has been turned on. And that's solely just because, we talk about how there's a lot of blame to go around, but when it comes to being in an absolute free fall and the ability to stop a free fall, a lot of that falls on the head coach. We've talked about it, right? Like, obviously you lost Larkin, and that's a huge blow, but that shouldn't be this big of a blow to this roster. This team's inability to put together a complete game outside of one game against Buffalo and then immediately going back to what was losing them games the next day against Pittsburgh. I mean, that falls on the head coach, in my opinion, and the system that he's running, or any inability to adjust. And that's, that's what we're going to be focusing on in this episode. I agree with you, Scotty, that if this team cannot right the ship in the remaining, 14 games left, then I think that burner immediately gets cranked up. Because if you spend the last month and a half of your season in an absolute free fall, that tells me that you've lost the locker room completely. Like, the inability to adjust, even with the return of Larkin and maybe hopefully the return of Husso, and the inability to get right, that is a huge sign to me that this locker room already has given up on his system. That being said, there's still 14 games left to correct. We saw in December that they can correct, and they actually overcorrected. They were overperforming for 2 months. As much as we gave him credit in those 2 months for how good they are or were, we recognize they were overperforming. Now they're drastically underperforming. But when they underperform for this big of a stretch, that falls on coaching and Derek Lalonde. And I have specific nitpicks that mostly go back to the usage of the defenseman. We saw in practice last week, and this is where we saw in practice last week, Scotty, that he had shook up the lines, right? He shook up the forward lines and he shook up the D pairs. Come game time, we had the official Red Wings tweet that said, these are your lines for today. These are the D pairs. And you're like, okay, at least they're trying something new. But as soon as the game started, there was no shakeup to the D pairs whatsoever. It was the same old D pairs we had seen that had been getting crushed game in and game out. And again, we've talked about it at length. A big reason why the D pairs are getting crushed is because the forwards are not playing any defense whatsoever. And we have to talk about that too as part of the problem, right? You have a bunch of forwards that don't play defense, and you have a system that tries to hammer home defensive responsibility, and they're not meshing right now. But specifically right now, the defense and the way these defenders are getting used is not working, and he's being stubborn with the inability to change those D pairs up.
So this is my, on game recaps, we each give like our biggest difference maker or whatnot, and then we kind of go throughout the show and have our segments. Like, if I was to pick one thing that has upset me the most, my biggest Lalonde difference maker in the last, in the month of March, I guess we can just say, it would be this. This is easily my biggest pet peeve that we will talk about in this entire episode, and that is the complete inability to change up the blue line whatsoever. It is mind-boggling to me. It's not just like, oh, that kind of upset me. Like, I genuinely cannot track the logic for not changing anything. It makes negative sense to me. I do not understand how you can watch how many goals they've given up, how atrocious the defense has looked from a team perspective, to your point, Brian, obviously, right? This is not just on the blue line, like the forwards too, but how you can look at how the team defense has played and the goals against that you've had in the month of March and go, you know what? The six that we're rolling out there are completely fine, and their partners are completely fine, and we're going to change absolutely nothing. That is like actually preposterous to me. And it's mind-blowing. Like, it makes me so upset how that logic tracks whatsoever. And even if you want to keep like the top pair together, like I think that we're going to talk about them later on in the show, I know. But like how you can really, to me, it keeps going. It just all goes back to Sherratt and Petrie. Like, how you can continue to look at those two during the month of March and go, you know what, we're going to keep them together and keep them on the second line no matter what, or second pair no matter what, is nothing short of ridiculous to me, to be honest.
And, to be fair, they had a pretty solid game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. They're one of the few pairs. They ate big minutes against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they performed fine in that game. But overall, yes, they get hemmed in almost every single game, and they get stuck. And this isn't like, I don't want this to be us bragging on Schrott and Petrie. This is on the decision by coaching to continually trot them out in positions and give them minutes that they're not capable of playing at the same caliber that Cider and Wallman are. And like we could go deeper and talk about Mata and Gossesbear, and we will. But before we can get to that, I got to talk to you guys today about Sleeper. It's well past the halfway point of the NHL season, and despite where the Red Wings are, as of recording this, they're 1 point up. Washington could win tonight, and the Red Wings could be back out. I want to remind you guys that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is the number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Ovechkin, Crosby, McKinnon will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists. If you want to pick goalie, you can pick saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Red Wings fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We're talking about the Derek Lalonde's stubbornness in sticking with the same pairs. Yeah, I don't know what it is with his love for Schrott and Petrie. And more so, I don't know what his love is with giving them minutes. You know, and I say that from the standpoint that Seider and Wallman, or Seider in particular, if you view him as a true number one defenseman, which I think this organization does, he should be playing more minutes. And we saw, and I mean like 25, 27 minutes a night. That's what true number one defensemen eat in this league. Derek Lalonde's usage of Moritz Seider has gotten to the point of it being absurd. We talked earlier in the season about how he is getting the most difficult usage and some of the highest percentage of defensive zone starts in the league. And that has not stopped. And at the time, we were like, well, what are you going to do? But we're at a point now where we can no longer use that as an excuse, when at the same time, he's getting some of the fewest minutes against the other team's worst in the league. And a lot of people will be like, well, that makes sense. If he's getting the most against the toughest players in the league, he'll be getting the fewest against the worst. That's not true. You can see against elite competition, Moritz Seider plays 48% of his ice time a game against the other team's elite competition. And again, people will go, well, that makes sense that he would have that much against elite competition, and that would mean he plays so little against other teams worse. Well, here's Adam Pelech down here, right? It's hard to see. I'll zoom it in for you guys. Adam Pelech of the New York Islanders plays 45% of his total ice time against the other team's best lines. So when you sort it by grit tensity, their nice way of saying the worst players on the team, you can see Moritz Seider has the least amount of ice time against the other team's worst. So 14.5% of his ice time is against the other team's worst. Where now you wonder where Adam Pelech ranked, the guy who was right up there with the highest amount of ice time against the elite competition. So if you find Adam Pelech, you just hit that nice little Control F function and you scroll down. Oh, he plays 25%. Look how much further down he is than Moritz Seider. He plays 10% more of his total ice time against grit competition. So Moritz Seider, there is the option here to treat him like a true number one defenseman. Give him the ice time of a true number one defenseman like he should. And by doing this, you get him against the worst competition. So you give him another opportunity to shine while simultaneously cutting back on exposure to Schrott and Petrie as your second pair, which means less chances for them to get burned by other teams worse and fewer chances still for Mata and Gossesbear. This usage that Derek Lalonde has done for Wallman and Cider to only use him against the other team's toughest competition, only in the defensive zone, and not give him any opportunity to showcase what he's got against fewer. Like, that's just, he's the only one in the league doing it like that. Other teams in the league, every other team in the league, at least gives their number one defenseman chances against other teams' worst players to give them an opportunity to shine. And it's just infuriating to me that this is the only way they're using Cider, because it's hampering his development.
Yeah, well, you don't even have to like pick a name out of a crowd. You can just go back to that chart, and they are the only outliers.
Yeah,
They're
here, throw it back up.
Wallman and Cider are quite literally the only outliers. This is the rest of the NHL is all in a big group, so much so that you can't even read the names because they're all on top of each other because it's such a universal mindset and usage. And then you literally just have Wallman and Cider by themselves. That you don't even have to pick another name. That is it. And it's the same when you go from, the deployment against the bottom lines versus the deployment against the top lines. It's the same thing. They are completely, there you go. Cider is the outlier. He is by himself all the way up there. Like it's mind-boggling. And again, I think that plays into the Sherratt and Petrie conversation that we were having before, where it's just like, why is there, I want to call it a borderline obsession with not only keeping them together, if you think that that's where they're best used and they're going to be most productive, I guess, I guess I would like to see something new after losing 9 of your last 10, but sure. But like, even if you're going to keep them together, like playing them and really the entire bottom 4, playing them as much as they are at the expense of minutes of your clear top pair. Like, it's not like, oh, like sometimes, inconsistency. No, it is blatantly obvious who your top pair defensemen are and should be on a night-to-night basis.
And that's the thing that's so infuriating is that you have your bona fide top pair, but you're not even using them to the fullest of their capabilities. Right. Like the argument we were making is like, oh, what choice do you have? But then you look, other teams are giving their number one pair even more minutes. And that intensity, that elite level is balanced out by minutes against lesser competition. And by giving them more minutes against lesser competition, again, Moritz Seider played 27 minutes against the Buffalo Sabres, and he looked great. He looked great. He ended up being a +2, and I know we don't care much about plus minus, but it's just one of those things where it's like, why are we only giving Cider tough matchups? Why are we only putting him in the defensive zone against the other team's elite and then not giving him opportunities against anyone else? Because if you do that, and like the other aspect too, again, about the Sherratt and Petrie and the Mata and Gostisbehere, like you have 7 defensemen. You called up Austin Czarnik to get Fisher out of the center role so you could also scratch Daniel Sprong. You called up a forward for the sole purpose, a center rather, for the sole purpose of shaking up your forward lines and scratching a guy that needed to be scratched. You refuse with 7 defensemen to shake up your D pairs. You sat Jake Wallman for 1 game, and that was that game and the game where Jonathan Bergen wasn't there yet. So you had to do 11 and 7 were the only games. And I'm not on here trying to promote more ice time for Justin Holl, but it gets to a point where you have to try something. You have to give Moritz Seider an opportunity to succeed because you're not doing it. Even when you were winning in spite of, you were sacrificing Moritz Seider's success to win. And in doing so, you're hampering his development. I mean, at a certain point, it all comes back down to that usage. The usage of that top pair dictates the other 2 pairs below it. If that top pair is struggling, and the middle pair is struggling, and the third pair is struggling, then mix it all up. Throw it in a blender. You did it with the forward lines. Like, it can't. I'm just desperate for anything at this point.
Yeah, that's the part that's so confusing to me. Is like, we have no issue putting the forwards in a blender when the offense goes quiet, and then we don't touch the blue line no matter what. Offense, defense, whatever you want to point to that's been struggling. We refuse to touch the blue line and change that in any capacity, whether it's usage or, pairings. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure I'm talking in circles. I'm just really riled up because the Cider usage kills me. Segment 3, we'll talk about the forwards, and then we'll do a game preview for you guys. So stay tuned to Locked On Red Wings. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. All right, the forwards, Scotty. Another thing to nitpick. Yes, obviously, Dylan Larkin being hurt is not helping this team whatsoever with the offensive production, offensive zone creativity. And honestly, some of the problems that this team has in that regard has a lot more to do with the construction of the roster than it does with trying to get them to play a system, which honestly falls back on Steve Yzerman. And there's a conversation to be had about the job Steve Yzerman has done this year. But when it comes to the forwards, it goes back to that, again, inability to adjust. And this is where I get a little bit softer on Derek Lalonde, because he's trying to implement a system that is defensive responsibility, and you have a bunch of forwards that are historically are not defensive responsible. So it can be tough to get them to buy into that way of thinking. And when they do buy in, we have seen how good this team can be. They were never good defensively, but with those forwards playing that way, they were good enough to go on an incredible heater. But now that things have gone south, these forwards have stopped playing defensive. They've no longer bought into the system, and the team is losing games like crazy.
Buy-in thing, though? Like, they went 2 months of playing really good hockey. Like, I have a hard time believing they're just like, oh, we lost, 7 straight, so like the last 2 months don't matter. Like, I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily. I just like I don't know. I walk a fine line with that one.
But that's where it becomes on Derek Lalonde to get them set straight. And he has not been able to get the offense right, get the team right. The goaltending too. They're all in their own heads. And he said it the other day in media availability. The team is fragile right now. And his inability to get this team right mentally, and particularly the offense to score some freaking goals, is, I think, an indictment on him. Now, listen, I'm not an NHL head coach. I'm not in the locker room. I don't know how difficult it is. I don't know what's going on. But at a certain point, it stops being about the team's inability to play the game and the coach's inability to get them to play it right. And I think that's where we're at. There's blame to go around everywhere on this team. But one person we have barely talked about on this losing streak was Derek Lalonde. And it's only fair that when the team was playing well, we sing his praises. And now that the team's free falling at the most important juncture of the season, we criticize him too, because let's face it, again, he is to blame, partially at least, for the forwards' inability to adjust.
Yeah, no, we have talked about it ad nauseum during the losing streak. Like, this offense looks lost, like actually lost. Like, there is zero creativity on the offensive side of the puck. There is zero zone entry without Dylan Larkin. It is truly remarkable in the most negative possible connotation how the offense has looked during this free fall. There is nothing. There's no setting up in the zone. There's nothing being ran. There's no ability to even really enter the zone. Like I've said a lot during this losing streak, it's a lot of dump and chase, a lot of just handing the puck over once you get into the corner. It is staggering how bad the offense looks in the month of March.
Yeah, I'm so at a point now. Again, like, I know it's going to be hard to believe what I say after the rant I just went on in segment 2, right? Like, I don't think you're at a point now where you fire him. And I go back to what I said yesterday and the day before. I believe in continuity behind the bench. I think it sets a bad precedent to fire your coach every couple years. We've seen how bad that has worked out for teams like the Buffalo Sabres, right? How many head coaches have they gone through throughout their rebuild where they've had a plethora of talent on the roster, but they can't get it right because before a team can establish its identity,
they fire their coach. But the problem is right now is this team doesn't look like it has an identity. The identity they've tried to establish has completely fallen apart in the last 9 games. And I'm not trying to use 9 games as the reason for firing Derek Lalonde. And that's why I'm saying that right now the burner's been turned on, but it's not all the way up yet. You're not at a point where you fire him. I still think regardless, unless in the last 14 games, this team cannot get it right, I think that you give him the 3rd year and you use year 3 as your barometer. But you're looking at a hockey team that was firmly in control of their destiny. And I understand that at that time, they were highly outperforming their capabilities. And now I also understand that I think their PDO in this month of March is like 93%, which is ridiculous. That's some of the worst puck luck you could ever see. But it just gets to a certain point where, yeah, you got to look at your head coach as part of the solution and part of the problem. Even when this team was succeeding, we knew this team wasn't good at 5-on-5. We knew the defensive issues were there. And now you're seeing it rear its ugly head. So as frustrated as I am with the usage of Moritz Seider, I'm still not at that point yet of firing Derek Lalonde. But I think you're at a point where you can start going, well, if he can't get this fixed, you might not have a choice.
Yeah, to me, this is very much a summer conversation. This is not, they will not fire him midseason. That they're not going to fire him in the last 14 games. How many games are left of the regular season? That's just not happening. But if they continue to just free for all, and you're looking after game 82, and you've only won like a game or two the rest of the year, and you just completely can't right the ship, then it's much more of a summer conversation about, do we trust the direction? Do we trust the system, et cetera, et cetera? And that's a conversation we'd obviously have. But focusing on where we are right now with still the amount of games that are left, there is, there's no chance that we're going to wake up tomorrow or later this week, even if they lose again to Columbus, which hopefully they don't, we're just going to wake up and he's going to get canned. Like that. That's very much a summer conversation. And again, it might be an aggressive conversation in the summer. I'm not saying that there's just like no chance anything happens the next 7 months. But short-term versus long-term, this is not something that's going to happen, this week or next week or something. This is much more of a, if they can't right the ship the rest of the year, then we have the conversation in the summer.
Yeah, and I mean, to emphasize my point on the Cider minutes thing, like the very next day they go to Pittsburgh, right? I talked about how he played 27 minutes at home. You can choose your matchups better at home. They go on the road to Pittsburgh, and now he only plays 19 minutes and 18 seconds, and only 13 of those at 5-on-5 in that hockey game. I am, because he's chasing matchups. He only wants more Cider out there against the toughest of the tough. And it's just, how about you just play him? And I know that sounds no duh, but like I don't want to go back down that rabbit hole. Just give Moritz Seider more ice time and give him ice time against lesser competition. So you have your best defenseman out there and opportunities where you can shine. That's what every other team in the NHL does, and they succeed with it.
Yeah, like I said, they're outliers. They are legitimately out. You can see it on a visual representation how much of outliers they are in that usage. So.
You can have your cake and eat it too with a guy like Moritz Seider. Every team in the NHL does it. That's just how number one defensemen are used.
For sure.
All right. Real quick game preview. The Red Wings play the Columbus Blue Jackets, the 3rd game of 3 in the season series. Red Wings have won the previous 2. Next 2 games. I mean, I've been saying it over this. Please win
this hockey game.
Please win.
Please beat the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Johnny Gaudreau leads their team in points. They're 8th in the Metropolitan. Gaudreau has 50 points in whatever 68 games played, whatever it is. He's only got like 11 goals, which is crazy for Johnny Gaudreau. And you cannot lose to the Blue Jackets. But we've been saying that for the past 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games, and they have. It's just another situation where you got to say, please win.
Yeah, man, this team is not good. This is bottom 7 in the league in pretty much every statistical category. 25th in goals for, 28th in goals against, 31st in power play, 23rd in penalty kill, 25th in save percentage. Like, I mean, you name it. They're toward the bottom of the league in it. You're at home. You please do not lose this hockey game.
Right.
Please.
Right. That's going to do it. So it's going to be, I'm sure it's hard for people to believe me when I say it's not time to fire Derek Lalonde yet, but my
Well,
frustrations
no,
are
there's
very
a
real.
difference between like clear frustration and like get him out of here today. Like those are two very there's a lot between those two steps. So
All right, we'll be back with a game recap tomorrow. Let's pray they win. Same time. Oh, sorry. Final thoughts.
we will
Same time, same place. See your team every day.
every day.